Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'm going to be talking about how I like to rotate footwear based on my training goals. So I like to train in a lot of different ways. I like to lift heavy, I like to run, I like to move fast. I think the trendy term for that these days is hybrid athlete or lifter. So I'm going to be talking about when and where I like to use each style of footwear and discuss how to approach this topic in your life. So in the grand scheme of training, footwear is just a small piece of the pie. However, to make any great pie, you do need all the ingredients. So what I would suggest doing is looking at footwear, especially in the context of training and working out, as tools. These are tools for accomplishing the task at hand. And so the tools that we decide to use for accomplishing those tasks should be based on things like preferences, comfort, and what is going to allow us to perform our best. Because if we can choose the right tools and kind of get out of our own way when it comes to our own biases, we can then move that needle forward a little bit faster when it comes to our training progress. And so before I dive into each style of footwear, I want to make it known I do not want you to take this video as verbatim and think that this is the only way to think and conceptualize about footwear. This is how I like to approach this topic, but I would suggest challenging yourself to think about the footwear that you use based on your goals in your own individual context, because that is going to allow you to perform your best, and hopefully this video can lead you to better suggestions in that realm. The first style of footwear that I want to discuss and that I use on a weekly basis is a barefoot shoe. So a barefoot shoe is a minimalist shoe designed to replicate what it's like to be barefoot on a daily wear basis. The shoe will articulate a ton and you'll have a minimalist stack height, so you get a lot of ground feel with this shoe. You'll also typically have a wider midfoot and toe box. Now, before I dive into the why and how I like to use barefoot shoes, I want to make it known that I am not in the camp that thinks you have to use barefoot shoes all of the time. I like to integrate barefoot shoes into my lifestyle and training based on the context of my goals. I think there is a world where we can use training shoes and barefoot shoes and benefit from both. So just making that known that I am not in that all or none mindset that come along with barefoot shoes. Now, why do I like to use barefoot shoes? The first and biggest reason is for variability. I like to expose my feet and ankles to different stressors and different ranges of motion, and by using barefoot shoes, it's kind of an easy way to do this. And so with training, for example, I'll use barefoot shoes for workouts or lower body days where I do want a slightly different range of motion. So for example, training on a 0mm drop, so a zero drop shoe like a minimalist shoe, will be different than a training shoe with something like an 8mm drop. It will be different than a weightlifting shoe that has a 0.75 to 1 inch heel. So it will expose your ankles to different ranges of motion. You'll also get a lot more ground feedback with the style of footwear. So I'll use them for things like RDLs and deadlifts where I want a lot of ground feel and where I'm trying to cut down on the stack height in my shoes. Additionally, I'll use barefoot shoes on days where I am purposely trying to build up my feet. And so this could be for workouts or for short runs where I am trying to expose myself to different grades of stress. So for example, if I have a light stem plyometric day, I like to use barefoot shoes because I know that style of training is not going to fatigue my feet a ton or ankles a ton, and also get some nice benefit with acclimating to that level of stress. And then on a high stem plyo day, or like a day where I'm integrating in sprints, I might reach for a different style of footwear because using this style of footwear in that context can be a little bit more fatiguing. That is something that you're gonna have to experiment with your own training that I have learned over time. Another way I'd like to integrate barefoot shoes into my weekly basis is on a daily wear basis. With the zero drop construction and with the wider width, I find that it can be really useful and just more comfortable to wear these out and about. For example, if I'm working at a coffee shop and I'm gonna be standing, I'll wear barefoot shoes because I like having that additional width, and I do like having that zero drop construction. It feels a little bit more natural, but that is just one way that I like to integrate them into my lifestyle. It does not mean I wear barefoot shoes every day, but it does mean that there are days where I purposely wear barefoot shoes to give myself a slightly different exposure to different environments for my feet and ankles. So if you're thinking about integrating barefoot shoes into your weekly basis, make sure that you do it slowly and you acclimate to this style of footwear. This style of footwear will feel different than your traditional shoe or your traditional training shoe and running shoe, so you will need to kind of ease yourself into the style of footwear. But I do think there is a world where you can rock barefoot shoes, training shoes, running shoes, weightlifting shoes, etc., and get a ton of benefit from using all of them. And that's how I like to use barefoot shoes. The next style of footwear that I like to integrate and use on a weekly basis is a cross-training shoe. So this is a shoe designed with versatility in mind. Essentially, it's a shoe that you can lift in, jump in, do HIIT workouts in, even short runs in. So think workouts where you're blending a little bit of everything into one session. It's a training shoe that's kind of like a jack of all trades. And now there are a ton of nuances that exist between different cross-training shoes. For example, you have shoes that work really well for CrossFit while others work well for HIIT. And that's kind of like where I like to nerd out and the nuances between the cross-training shoes, and that's kind of why I have a YouTube channel. But cross-training shoes are a regular shoe that I use on a weekly basis. And so why and when I like to use cross-training shoes? So the first style of workout where I'll reach for a cross-training shoe is a CrossFit workout or a functional fitness workout where I'm blending a little bit of everything into one session. This is also a session where I don't feel like rotating shoes or switching shoes mid-workout. So if I'm lifting, jumping, doing some form of Metcon or conditioning, I'll usually reach for a cross-training shoe because I like the level of stability that you get with this shoe, and I generally enjoy the upper security that you get with cross-training shoes and the traction that comes along with most cross-training shoes outsoles. So for workouts where I'm blending a little bit of everything, I'll use cross-training shoes. Also, in that context, for high stim days where I'm going to be doing a lot more volume when it comes to jumping or any form of high stress activity, I'll typically reach for a cross-training shoe too, because I like the little bit of extra cushion you get with the shoe compared to a barefoot shoe, because generally I find it to be a little bit less fatiguing and I find that to be a little bit more comfortable for my individual needs. Another area where I'll wear cross-training shoes is on a daily wear basis. So why I like cross-training shoes and why I like having a barefoot shoe, running shoe, and cross-training shoe is because a cross-training shoe kind of like walks that middle ground between giving you a little bit more cushion, but also a slightly more stable ride. So on days where I don't feel like rocking a barefoot shoe all day or having a thicker foam midsole from a running shoe, I'll reach for a cross-training shoe, and that's based on my overall preferences on comfort. So that is something that you'll want to explore on your own if you decide to integrate different footwear in to your lifestyle and your overall training wants and needs. The next style of footwear that I like to regularly integrate into my training is a weightlifting shoe. So a weightlifting shoe is a specific type of footwear. It is a shoe with a purposely elevated heel. This heel height can range from like 0.6 to a full inch of elevation. You'll also generally have midfoot support and security added on to this style of footwear, and you'll have a stable outsole with good traction. So with weightlifting shoes, you'll generally use them for snatches, clean and jerks, squats, and other lower body exercises where a weightlifting shoe kind of fits the context of your needs and wants. And so with weightlifting shoes, there are two key areas where I'll integrate them into my training. The first is with Olympic lifts. So if I'm practicing the snatch or clean and jerk, I'll typically reach for weightlifting shoes. Now I will use cross-training shoes and barefoot shoes here and there for those lifts as well, but I find it a lot easier to get depth with the shoe, especially when catching weight because of the elevated heel. I'll also use them for squats. And so I'm a pretty lanky dude and I have decent mobility. However, if I am trying to get full depth, especially with high bar squats or front squats, I find weightlifting shoes to help a ton. This elevated heel will essentially allow you to typically feel like you can maintain a more upright torso, which can then feed into stronger mechanics for certain squat styles. So if you have never used an elevated heel for squatting, I have filmed a video before discussing flat versus elevated heels for squatting. I'm going to link that up there, so check that out. But essentially an elevated heel can change your overall mechanics, and for some lifters and athletes, that can be an improvement. Another context where I like to use weightlifting shoes is in the context of focusing on quad biased exercises, or even using them on machines where I'm trying to get a quad bias, or for machines that just don't align with my anatomy. Not every leg press and hack squat works out really well for my overall anatomy, so experimenting with an elevated heel can help with achieving different ranges of motion based on the context of my training. Now, does everybody need a pair of weightlifting shoes, especially if you already have cross-training shoes, barefoot shoes, etc.? And no, not necessarily. I think of weightlifting shoes as knee sleeves, lifting belts, and lifting straps. They are tools for accomplishing certain tasks at hand. And so I think it can be useful having an elevated heel here and there based on the context of your training goals, but it's not necessarily a must. So if I'm in prep or if I am focusing on my high bar squat or front squat, once again, I will use a weightlifting shoe because it feeds better into my mechanics. But I do integrate blocks here and there where I purposely use flat shoes for my squats to expose myself to different ranges of motion. So again, weightlifting shoes can be awesome tools, and I would suggest exploring what it's like to squat with an elevated heel and with a flat shoe, and then program blocks accordingly to give yourself a slightly different exposure to different environments that can help out your mechanics and your training. The final style of footwear that I like to integrate in on a regular basis is a running shoe. And so running shoes are pretty self-explanatory in nature. They are shoes designed for running. And so with running shoes, you'll typically have beveled heels, so this rounded heel, you'll have a bit more toe spring, thicker midsoles with a bit more cushion, and light uppers. They are designed to assist the act of running and the overall mechanics needed for running. And so with running shoes, why I'll integrate them in on a weekly basis is number one, for longer distance runs. If I'm running anything more than like 2 or 3 miles, I'll typically reach for a running shoe. They typically beat me up a little bit less on a weekly basis compared to a cross-training shoe that runs a little bit more stable, and a barefoot shoe where you're gonna have a lot more ground impact and force going to the feet and ankles. I'll also use running shoes for daily wear context. So if I'm going on longer walks and I'm absolutely zonked and fatigued from my training for the day, I'll sometimes reach for running shoes because I find them to be a little bit more comfortable and forgiving when it comes to their overall cushion. So with running shoes, you'll want to probably use them for longer distance runs. Unless you are acclimated to barefoot shoes or minimalist shoes for that running style, you'll typically want a running shoe for that because they will beat you up a little bit less when it comes to the durability component of running, and they can be useful for daily wear if you're walking longer distances and you want a slightly more cushioned ride. All right, before we wrap this video up, let's answer the question, like, do you need to invest in 4 different types of shoes for your training? And absolutely not. I am not trying to sell you on shoes, and truthfully, I don't care what you train in. What I do care about is that you're making footwear selections that allow you to train at your highest level and that are comfortable for you. So what I would suggest doing is looking at different styles of footwear and seeing what helps you actually perform your best. I'm seeing a trend right now in the footwear community where it's kind of like this all or none mindset where you have to use this style of footwear all the time or only this style of footwear. And I think that can be really limiting, especially for folks who may not necessarily resonate with certain styles of footwear. So I would suggest, once again, exploring different things in different contexts to see what works best for your needs, because at the end of the day, if you're not comfortable with the shoe you have on based on your training goals, what use is it really serving? If you have additional questions on any of the shoes mentioned in this video or how to integrate different shoes into your lifestyle and your training, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, drop a like on the video, drop share to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.